Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everyone enjoyed their lunch, even if you had to do it quite so efficiently. But we've got a short video here to help you deal with that sort of post-lunch sleepiness that occasionally happens. awake now? Hope that worked. One outcome of last year's Transit of Venus Forum was the relationship that developed with the people of Uawa, Talaga Bay. On the day of the Transit of Venus, when Talaga Bay was almost the only place in New Zealand to see the sun, the people of the Uawa Talaga Bay community launched a long-term sustainability project for their community. That project has been generously supported by the Alan Wilson Center, who are sponsoring today's event also. Today, Dr. Wayne Nata, Kelly Blackman, Bridget Parker, Hoana Forrester, and some students from the Talaga Bay Area School and Koranui are here to tell us about their project. Wayne, welcome.
Titirangi ka uhia hei kōrero, kia tirohi ho ki wairerera, ki te puhi o paurewa, hine matioro e.
And so in the time of Hine Matioro, a person by the name of James Cook came to our shores, and we celebrated his arrival and his descendants mixing amongst ours over the last, you do the maths, tēnā tātou. That's 30 seconds gone of our 3-minute limit. Uawanui is the name of our place, our river, our waters, our ecological space. From the takutai moana to the back of beyond, our land, our home, of which we are most fond. This works. We are from Talaga Bay on the sunny east coast, descendants of thinkers and doers. We boast of their deeds, the legacies passed down through the years. In work and in play, their aspirations and fears. Apparently, we are a rural, depressed economy, primarily farming and, of course, forestry, the benefits of which have provided for us so long. The reality, though, is that some things can go wrong. Which brings us to this point in our rich history. With considerable thought for the future, you see, the way we exist, the life that we live, a bicultural approach built on dual heritage. The Transit of Venus celebrations were key in gaining support from the AWC. Charles, Peter and Clive, the late Paul Callaghan, who all helped shape our vision, our own master plan. There are things we can do. There are things we can do, I'll make this up now, both great and small, that help our environment, that benefit all, to restore flora and fauna that once did abound on riverbank and estuary where they're no longer found. Our catchment, our cultures, our community, thinking and doing, sustainability, maintaining a balance of input and out, healthy water, healthy people is what we're about. We have short-term solutions and longer ones too, that span generations, that began at the school. It is clear that the process is organic in flow. We are working and learning along the way as we go. Building relationships, very much we have been amongst ourselves and with others who are equally keen to advance an agenda of good stewardship, of a vibrant economy of citizenship. You see, the future is bright, just like this photo. The game plan is clear, but the nose to the grindstone for the cause so dear to our hearts and minds, our collective health, our land, our home, our notion of wealth. Because, great photo, eh? Uawanui is the name of our place, our river, our waters, our ecological space, where nature and people must live as one in the best place on earth, where we greet the rising sun. Tēnā koutou.
Thank you, Wayne, and your wonderful colleagues. That was lovely. Now, further to our theme this afternoon of regional development, I'm pleased to invite the mayor of our wonderful city, Celia Wade Brown, to chair session 2. Celia.
Ngā mihi nui o te rā, and haere mai ki te upoko o te ika a Maui. So welcome to New Zealand's smart green capital, the head of the fish, which is meant to be the smarter end of the animal. Our vision, Wellington towards 2040, is of improving social, economic, cultural and environmental outcomes. And I'd like to acknowledge, together with the other local body members and staff from local government today, that it is really extraordinary that we're standing here or sitting here talking and listening about building a mutually beneficial set of natural, social and economic capital while we've just had the 4 well-beings ripped out of the Local Government Act. However, many of us interpret local need to include environmental, social, cultural, and economic well-being. And I want to give you a couple of examples from the capital before I move to introduce our speaker. Well, what keeps talent here? As Sir Paul Callaghan said, we want this city to be a place where talent wants to live. The creative talent that brings you Lord of the Rings, which was premiered here. The IT talent that brings us Xero's financial services. The talent that fills the stages and galleries of Wellington and actually earns our GDP mainly from the weightless economy. Well, in large part, it's our spectacular natural environment for mountain biking, paddleboarding, scuba diving, and running that brings a lot of those talented people and keeps them here. Our decoupling of economic success from negative externalities has actually meant that despite population growth, and we are growing, it may be a more manageable rate than other places, but we are growing, but we've had total water use reduction, total waste reduction, and total greenhouse gas emission reduction at the same time. So we're doing something right, and there's some of it that must be good growth. Though I always have to remember that all our tablets and phones and even our bicycles do require someone to mine or to recycle the minerals to make those tools of our trade and of our transport. We also have to look at both the effects and the opportunities globally. I just want to tell you one really nice economic success story. There's a Wellington company called the Formery, and they came on a China delegation with me. And anyone who's been to China will know that there is huge visible air pollution. You can taste it, you can feel it. And the Formery is teaming up with Chinese companies to turn rice waste into a good fabric, combining it with New Zealand merino, in fact. Instead of burning that rice waste, it will become a profitable commodity, good for the Chinese atmosphere, good for both people's lungs and other animals' lungs, and good for the New Zealand economy. We need more of those kinds of bright spots in our economy and our environment. I could talk about the Green Cities Index, the biophilic cities, there are all sorts of things, but I'm sure you can find all about those things on our website. What I want to acknowledge is that Pavan talked about whole country's GDP and resources. We're now going to hear from Marlene Laros from Cape Town. She's a policy and strategy advisor at ICLEI, the Institute of Local Environmental Initiatives, which does need to return to an active role in New Zealand. She's been working to connect the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, TEEB, as we're now able to call it, with local and regional authorities. And I'm looking forward very much to learning about TEEB for cities and hearing her keynote shed lights on the benefits of considering ecosystems at the local level. So let's welcome up Marlene.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you very much for those kind words of welcome, Mayor Celia. I am so honored to be here. I think my parents would approve that I keep good company, even when I'm far away from home. And I must say it's an unenviable task to follow the previous speakers and to try and tell you something new. But this is my endeavor, and perhaps we'll learn something new together. What I'd like to do today is to tell you a little bit about the organization that I advise, ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, and how it tries to influence action on the ground to enable local sustainability. What I'd also like to tell you about are some of the tools that we've developed to assist and aid in that process. One key one with which we've collaborated with TEEB is the city's guidebook to implement TEEB at the local level, and I'd like to introduce the content of that to you as well today, as well as explore some examples of where thinking about value of ecosystems has influenced policy and decision-making on the ground. Aha. So, who are we? Who is ICLEI? ICLEI is an energetic and flexible movement working together with regional and national, international networks and participating in performance-based programs advancing through an international exchange of experience and solutions. We try to strengthen governments' capacities and try and provide knowledge and serve as a gateway to solutions for the future. We represent 12 megacities, 100 super cities and urban regions, 450 large cities, 450 small and medium-sized cities and towns within 84 countries. And that is the real strength, is the people on the ground are actually driving the process and the agenda of ICLEI. It's local government driven, so it's an association of local governments. And what I really like is this particular quotation from Mayor Park Wonsoon, who says that cities and local governments are not waiting for the world to change. We are changing the world together, and this is what ICLEI is all about. So we've been hearing a lot about the need to shift policy and change international policy and investment frameworks. However, this local level of governance that we have called local government is far more flexible than other spheres, and this is why the opportunity lies at this level. So why focus on cities and urban areas? Well, because of rapid urbanization, decentralization, degradation, and loss of ecosystem services, it seems to be a very important place to focus. But if you look at some of the statistics, including that urban areas and cities consume 75% of the resources globally and have a huge footprint far beyond the borders of their jurisdictional boundaries, that globally, as people, we are 50% urbanized, and that is changing rapidly, specifically in the developing world, and that at least 40% of the world economy, and I say at least because I think this is probably an underestimate, 40% of the world economy depends on biological resources. But when we look at the video showed earlier around rainfall generating systems and the fact that we need clean air, one would believe that it's far greater than that. I've heard a very interesting saying coming through on social networks. If you think that environment is not important to the economy, well, try and hold your breath while you count your money. So cities are hubs of the global economy. 100 largest cities produce 30% of the global GDP, and close to 80% of GDP is produced in cities. So this is a useful way of looking at the world. We've got one United Nations, 200 countries last time we counted, and 1 million local governments. So the power of the institutional makeup of our planet is really significantly at the local level. But what does this mean looking forward? We have an unbroken global trend. By 2050, that's within 40 years, we will have to build once more the same urban capacity as we've built over the last 4,000 years. That's significant. So if we need to do this in a way that is responsible, we would need to uncouple our growth from the destructive impacts that we have on ecosystems and the life support systems of the planet. But at the same time, this spectre could also provide a huge opportunity. If you think of the amount of investment that is going to be put into providing this kind of infrastructure, it's a coming of age time for local governments to direct that investment in the proper way. So we're part of a revolution. 19th century saw the Industrial Revolution, we saw the technological revolution, and here we have the urban revolution. We're becoming a planet of cities, really. And the economic power of city is starting to overshadow that of regional and national governments. Recent research in certain African countries is showing that the large cities, certainly politically, economically, are far stronger than the nations. And this is starting to be a growing global trend. So a little bit more about the organization, seeing I think I've motivated why we're so focused on urban development in cities, is that it's a project-based organization, but it is driven by local government members. And in terms of its history, it introduced Local Agenda 21 in the Rio 92 conference and continues to promote a global movement of cities for sustainable development. And the motto that we share is local action moves the world. Something about the organization in terms of how we're established and how we're set up. We have a number of regional offices. In fact, Oceania Secretariat is based in Melbourne, Australia. And what I'd like to just highlight is the city's Biodiversity Centre in Cape Town, South Africa, which is also the host of the Africa Secretariat, which has been in close partnership with a number of organizations internationally to drive forward the process of biodiversity being incorporated into planning and strategy at the local level. So the role that we see for ourselves is connecting leaders. Many of the fora that we engage in brings mayors together, in fact. Always a mayor's meeting, usually political agreements that emerge out of that, accelerating action through advocacy at international meetings and conference of parties. Significantly, that to do with recently COP17, as well as COP11 held in Hyderabad for the CBD. And then also to provide a gateway to solutions, to enable a policy science interface at a local level that can open up doors and shift the ways of thinking and doing things. The 8 agendas that we follow, the first being the integrated approach, is the sustainable city, the resilient city, which is obviously focused on disaster risk reduction in the face of global climate change, biodiversity, which is the one I'd like to focus on today, a low-carbon city, which obviously focuses on the decoupling of growth from our carbon dependencies, resource-efficient city, smart urban infrastructure, green urban economy, and healthy and happy community. And I want to emphasize the last area of the last agenda because it's often overlooked and underemphasized in terms of quality of life, which our natural environment and way in which we craft urban design contributes a significant amount, but is often underemphasized in the priorities that we set ourselves as a city. We tend to be focused on growth and less focused on human fulfillment. Again, a very useful quote from Ban Ki-moon, UN Secretary General, Rio +20, the road to sustainability runs through our cities and towns. I really like this statement because sustainability is a pathway. It's not necessarily an end point. And the way this is crafted brings into relief the importance of urban areas and cities specifically. So this horrendogram really outlines what it is that the city's biodiversity center does. It has a key purpose of motivating, guiding, and supporting local governments and partners to integrate biodiversity and ecosystem services into decision-making processes with a view to strengthening biodiversity management and creating more resilient, biodiverse, and livable cities. And in doing so, it provides a unique platform linking science and practitioners. Just to highlight a few of the entry points that we engage with cities, biodiverse cities, which is a broad network bringing people together in a networking platform, the local action for biodiversity pioneer process, which I'll say a little bit more about now, and then cities and biodiversity hotspots, which I'd also like to mention, as well as Urbis, which looks at the city within a city region. As you can see, our program is one of partnership, which brings IUCN, CBD, UN Habitat, and various other partners together. A brief overview of local action for biodiversity, in which we've tried to assist governments to improve and enhance biodiversity and ecosystem management, to provide support to integrate biodiversity into all decision-making at the city level, and also to provide that essential platform to link research science and with a policy practice interface. What you see on the right is a number of technical reports that have been produced by cities, and you'll see Watakere City, a New Zealand partner in the process. But in rolling out this program, we've tried to provide technical support, tools and resources, and a platform and local government network as well as a major advocacy role, which I will outline just a little bit later. So the lab process, and it seems very linear, but we should never think of this as a linear progression. It's often iterative, a 5-step process that people sign up to, and which ICLEI supports through this process. And really it's looking to emerge in a local biodiversity strategy and action plan. It's the local level version of the NBSAP, which many of you probably are familiar with. Guidelines for which ICLEI's been in partnership with the CBD in drafting, so that this can provide further guidance to local governments. But it's driven really towards ultimately implementation of projects on the ground. A view of the cities that are partners in this process to date. We have 34, and it provides a major way of drawing lessons from practice into the network and a mentorship process between cities and within the network. Just a quick view of what URBIS does. Urban Biosphere Initiative, a partnership with the Stockholm Resilience Centre. This is really trying to transcend the science policy interface, but is really also focused much more on drawing out the dependencies of cities on the surrounding environments. A passion of mine is biodiversity hotspots, using the Conservation International prioritization of biodiversity hotspots. It's a pioneering initiative that will focus on a select group of cities which are rapidly growing in biodiversity priority areas, with the outlook of growing an influential network of local governments that will reduce biodiversity loss and subsequently increase resilience to global change. If you look at some of the statistics here, within those specific areas, the 35 identified regions, Conservation International speaks about 50% of biodiversity at risk, only 2% of the Earth's surface, but a significant amount of biodiversity, and the impact that these cities can make on those surrounding areas is quite new in some instances as news to people, but is also quite significant as a global impact. And this is obviously something that we should aim to try and achieve, is impact at a global level. So the conservation action and through the program's network of cities will be focused on ecosystem-based adaptation that also looks to sustain ecosystem services for cities in hotspots. And obviously this in the context of climate change. But this cumulative action will ultimately result in local, regional, and global benefits by contributing to the attainment of the vision expressed in the CBD strategic plan, which is the 2011 to 2020 plan, and of course the associated ICLEI targets. The city's biodiversity hotspots program will supply a research platform and address challenge in providing evidence for economic, social, and ecologic results of the program. So all of the above will be carried out with the primary purpose of decentralized cooperation, where local communities in donor countries and local communities in countries that need support are linked in order to consolidate long-term cultural, technical, and economic partnerships. Just a quick view of the networking platforms. Urban Nature Forum, which is provided every 3 years together with the ICLEI Urban Congress. It's a platform that brings cities, science practitioners, experts, and other government stakeholders together to share tools and innovative ideas. Then we have a biennial Global Biodiversities Technical Workshop. The next one is being held in Joondalup, Australia, coming up this year in September. I'll provide more information much later on that. And a number of needs-based, localized, national or international thematic workshops, depending on what the cities need in terms of their support. Also ongoing city summits that are associated with the CBD COPs, and those are generally organized with partners. And participating city leaders are invited to opportunities to connect through high-level partner events, meetings, and committees, as I've mentioned before. So what are the advances in biodiversity at the local level that ICLEI is trying to achieve through this is to give a voice to local governments through advocating globally for the sustainable management of biodiversity resources at the local level and for increased collaboration between different levels of government. Through its various projects and initiatives, the Centre provides a platform to voice their concerns and aspirations in the international community. And the Pioneer program from Lab, which demonstrated since 2006 that local governments and cities can make tangible contribution and huge strides for biodiversity on the ground. Further to the advocacy role have been a contribution to a number of decisions that have been taken at the CBD COPs in terms of the plan of action for subnational governments, cities, and other local authorities, crafted by ICLEI and its partners. Okay, I mentioned some tools that ICLEI has developed to assist and aid the process that it sees itself instrumental in facilitating. And the key one, which we would like to focus on today, is the economics of ecosystems, the manual for cities, ecosystem services for urban management. But I want to stress that I think the lessons that can be drawn from this are beyond just urban management, and I think that the lessons for local government in general, whether they're small towns, rural towns, or cities, are equally as important. The ICLEI's also contributed to the city's biodiversity index, which is being driven by the Singapore National Parks, together in partnership with CBD. Various guidelines emerging from the local biodiversity programs, as well as a local biodiversity strategy and action plan guidelines, best practice guidelines for GBIF, which is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, and a host of others. So looking at the TEEB manual for cities, ecosystem services in urban management, this emerges a partnership between ICLEI and TEEB for local and regional policymakers teams. It's tailored specifically for cities, drawing on the experiences of ICLEI and the IUCN Lab Pioneer program, and highlights how a focus on ecosystem services and their valuation can create benefits for cities. It provides stepwise guidance on how to do this, illustrated by in-depth case studies. And for those of you who are joining the workshop after this and after the panel discussion, I have a limited number of these hard copy documents to give to you, but it's also available on the website for anyone who would like to find that on the TEEB website. Again, to emphasize, while it provides a stepwise guidance, there's no one-size-fits-all recipe, and one should always adapt your plans and processes for the local context. The TEEB Manual for Cities was officially launched at Livable Cities Forum and EcoCity World Summit in Montreal. This was in August 2011, and that's our chairman, David Cadman, holding up a copy. I'm very happy. A brief outline of the content of the manual. It provides an introduction to ecosystem services in cities. In its first section, Section 2, how to include ecosystem services in decision-making and policy, the stepwise approach So taking readers through a stepwise approach in terms of how to do it, and then applying the TEEB stepwise approach within city management. And I'll just give a brief outline to each section. So in the first section, in terms of its introduction, it deals with the value of nature for cities, why cities should be focusing on nature and the value of ecosystems. Looks at the definitions and examples of ecosystem services, and a focus on ecosystem services as to how they help cities to achieve their goals. So an upfront view of mainstreaming. Many of you would have seen this picture before. Costanza, 1997, quoted some of these figures, that the values of ecosystem services are often free of charge, but would be worth a fortune if we had to pay for them. Often very expensive to construct and maintain hard infrastructure, where ecosystems can sometimes do the job for much less investment. In terms of the huge disparity here in terms of the 1997 global GDP of $18 trillion US versus the value in terms of the ecosystem services provided, $33 trillion. Just to remind us, I was surprised earlier that we didn't get the definitions, but perhaps we've done them so many times that we can gloss over them. But I always feel it's quite helpful to remind ourselves what are we speaking about when we're speaking about ecosystem services. And we are speaking about provisioning services and regulating services, habitat or supporting services, and cultural services. So why should we do this? Why should we worry? Well, by including ecosystem services into city planning and management, you can save on municipal costs, boost local economies, improve the quality of life, secure livelihoods, and secure into the future provision of services, which is really important again in the context of climate change. And looking at some of the pictures on the right of constructed mechanisms failing, I suppose. It's just helpful also to ask the question, when we think about ecosystem services, what do we really think of? What do we really focus on most often? And again, I would say that cultural services are by far the poor cousin here of ecosystem services as we take them into account, but increasingly in cities need to be underscored. You would have seen some of these icons, and this is a picture of the back of our manual, just to show you, to try and build an iconic view of ecosystem services for people that readily identify and recognize these sorts of services. And I thought these were really helpful in terms of the easy depiction and identification. Again, divided into those 4 groups of services. So looking at section 2, how to include ecosystem services in decision making, the TEEB stepwise approach, which may not always be stepwise, but which provides a guide for local governments. So firstly, step 1 is to specify and agree on the problem or policy issue with stakeholders. And this may be a specific sectoral-based problem, water provision, for example, or it may be a broader study in terms of a biodiversity network or an open space network. Identify which ecosystems services are most relevant, and then determine what information is needed and select assessment methods, for which there are many. And I have to underscore that there are a range of tools freely available on the internet, as well as vast writings on the limitations of such available to you. But that step 4, which is assess ecosystem services, but also assess future changes in ecosystem services. So usually this assessment is undertaken with a scenario planning approach in terms of anticipating what might change into the future. And that's always a very challenging context, but it's always a very helpful context, especially in local government, where you need to respond at short notice to crises of services, hazards, etc. And then identify and assess management or policy options, and then assess those impacts of those policy options on the range of stakeholders. Okay, and then section 3, which is probably the most important piece, is trying to mainstream this intercity management. And it's often the most challenging. You know, we've got a range of people in the room, and it would be, I hear we've got people from business and mining and agriculture, and I think it's fantastic bringing people together to reflect on these issues. But often we sit in a conference or in a room where we are pretty much preaching to the converted. And that's not really helpful to shift the agenda. And what we are learning is that once you start a process like this, make sure that it's actually embedded within the various service units that you have within the city. It's really important to make the utility services director feel that they're responsible for managing the environment, which of course they are, but sometimes have never thought of themselves in that light. So it's an empowering process as well. Then just linking the very short manual back to the more comprehensive local and regional policy making manual is looking at some of the approaches in terms of management and regulation, planning and regulation, and some market-based instruments, and how that links to the broader guidance which is provided. So in terms of enhancing well-being, managing scarcity, guiding land use decisions, safeguarding biodiversity, providing incentives, which I think we underemphasize again, and enhancing products and services. I've been told I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to be moving quite quickly. This is just a graphic depiction, but to emphasize here that you may actually the options of how you follow this are there are a multitude of them. Okay, what I think I'm going to do is skip straight to the examples, if I may, and just look at some of the examples around seawall, and this is quite pertinent to Wellington quite recently. Sand dunes that provide a multitude of ecosystem services, coastal protection, erosion control, carbon sequestration, of course, water purification, habitat for endemic and plant, animal species, and tourism. And obviously, if you keep them intact, it can mediate the negative impacts of global climate change, including sea level rise, severe storms, drought. But if we fail, if we fail to conserve our natural ecosystems and their service, we're forced to invest in hard infrastructure to serve as a replacement. And they require expensive maintenance, specifically in the case of seawalls, and in some cases are less effective, as you've just seen in Wellington. And ultimately, what we're doing is we're trying to avert risk, but we're trying to avert risk in a cost-effective manner. And the question is, how can ecosystem-based adaptation provide that for you within your local governments? Okay, I'm going to skip to another example. So excuse me while I rapidly take you through the next few slides in the interests of time. An example in terms of ecosystem services in Abu Dhabi, where the wholesale value of fish landings in 2008 was estimated at 272 odd thousand US dollars, and about 28.5 for the United Arab Emirates as a whole. The mangroves provide an important supporting service, the value of which is easily determined through the value of fish landings as nursery grounds for several of these commercially important fish species, as well as for other species, which obviously contribute to ecosystem functioning. By restoring and protecting the mangroves, many other benefits and co-benefits are afforded to the city, including protection from storms and control of soil erosion. Now, the case of mangroves is very well made. There are massive investments going into replanting mangroves at the community level. In fact, just last month I was looking at some of these projects in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. But hence, one ecosystem, if well conserved or restored, can provide multiple ecosystem services free of charge. Okay, I'm going to skip to other examples which I won't be able to cover later. And what I think I will cover is the trees in Edmonton, Canada, if I can find them. There we go. In 2009, City of Edmonton analyzed the environmental effects, value, and structure of the urban forests. And obviously, there were at least 3 ecosystem services involved: cleaning air, sequestering carbon, and reducing stormwater in the city. It has 12.8 million trees, the city, and it was used to understand and communicate to the council and citizens some of the additional services offered by trees and how the use of trees can save the city money. Financial benefits were tallied in the cost of their boulevard, center, median, and buffer trees calculated. It was found that the average benefit per tree was, in balance, the net benefit was $56.35 US dollars. That's quite incredible as a value per tree. And I'm not going to cover the city of Kampala example because our colleague Pravan has already dealt with that. But what I would like to cover is the Canberra, Australia example, because it emphasizes a particular value. Again, around trees to regulate climate, reduce air pollution and energy costs, capture carbon and slow down runoff. And here the value was between 20 and 67 million US dollars during that period of time. But the important thing here is that it informs planning and budgeting, contributes to the provision of healthy and urban environment, and has identified savings for the city. Okay, so in summary, what I'd like to jump to, and I'm sorry to have to do this to you, it's taken far longer than I expected, is to show you this picture. I'm not sure if you've seen it, Future-Proofing Cities Report by Atkins and UCL, 2012. And what's really interesting is it starts to bring into some stark relief the risks that exist in terms of let's call it the characteristics of our environment and our growth that are conspiring against us. And interestingly enough here, we're looking at a sea change that has been affected in Durban, where because of the economic value of Durban's ecosystems, we've recently seen a sea change and mind shift by the major utilities that are really recognizing the need for business unusual. And then just to reflect again on the private sector, some of you may know about Plan B. Have you heard about Plan B? And that's an interesting issue because what it's looking at is a shifting value system. People are saying, well, the impacts that we have, what we're experiencing in terms of our generation of profit and our business, it's not the vision we had that we wanted to create, the impact that we wanted to create on the world. And so Plan B could be a real coming of age for business on the planet if you're optimistic. If you're jaundiced and a little bit more pessimistic, you may think, well, possibly because it's just no longer profitable to operate in that way, which is some of the lessons we've learned and heard earlier today. And then just my final slide is to really look at, sorry to do this to you, some of the lessons learned that I think are quite helpful. And perhaps what I'll do is cover some of this ground in the workshop later, is that we are experts in our own environment, and therefore we do actually understand the value of our ecosystems. And this word biodiversity has created some levels of abstraction between our understanding of what we need to survive, and has put a number of experts between us and the natural resources. And at the same time, it's a useful concept. But we are experts in our own environment, and we shouldn't forget that. Value does not necessarily mean value in a monetary way, and we need to find ways that integrate expert opinion and user group knowledge and needs. And this is being emphasized in a lot of the examples that we'll look at later. We need to mix globalized assessments with sector-based or service-focused assessments. In other words, some of the orders of magnitude answers that we're getting from metropolitan-based studies are the value of our ecosystem services is somewhere between 4 billion and 40 billion per annum is not very helpful, especially when you try and place that before the city treasurer and the city engineer. It sounds a bit vague. So what does seem to be more helpful is a sector-based or service-focused assessment, something focused on a specific problem that a municipality wishes to solve. And then we need to find this balance between learning by doing and getting the best information base and the best policy in place before we do anything, which is often what we've been hearing about is the analysis paralysis. But if we learn by doing, we must really do so in a proper way and develop good baselines and good monitoring and evaluation in terms of good research frameworks so that we can actually develop evidence-based policy in this arena. It's very important because we need to inform the regional and global assessments that we will hear about tomorrow. Thank you very much for your time. I really look forward to meeting with some of you later. Just some information about Biodiversity's conference, which is being held later this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marlene. And we've now got a little time for questions. And you've obviously got a huge wealth of material and knowledge there. So if people would like to come up to, I can see somebody approaching the microphone.
Gee, you've got good eyes. I can't see anything.
No, I can't. No, they weren't going to the microphone. They were going elsewhere.
Okay.
So maybe, I'm sure there will be questions this afternoon but at the workshop, but perhaps some of the examples that you'd like to follow up on. I might ask one to start with, which is in those different cities, how successful have they been in getting different nationalities, different cultures to work together on some of these projects? Have you got some highlights that you could give us?
I think that in terms of how stakeholder processes are encouraged and driven at the local level, it's something which is seen as a broad stakeholder-driven process. So while it needs to start at the political level, there's a lot of guidance as to how to engage communities of different capacities, for example. And by and large, you're seeing that participation is the key. People want to experience the process. They want to feel that there's a contribution that they're making directly. And usually, if you take an assets-based approach to the environment, is people are very aware of the assets that they have within their neighborhood, very aware of the fact that they can, if you're in an African context, depend that you can collect water from the local stream, or actually use a specific area for traditional practices, collection of materials, or even cultural practices of coming of age, etc. So it needs to take in on content, but also in terms of process, all of those aspects.
I think it would be very interesting if you were able to visit some of the local places with the local iwi. We have, I think, about 7 streams that join up into the harbour, and each of them has got a different cultural use. One for after childbirth, one for washing food, all these different things. And there are good reasons for the different qualities of water that we used for different things, and I'm sure we can learn. Now, is there someone there? No, I think you have stunned them, and I think it's also after lunch. So we might forgive people for not having questions at the moment, and look forward to learning more about ICLEI and how we can re-establish matters in New Zealand. I'd like you to join with me in thanking Marlene, and we've got a little gift for you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlene. Sir Stephen Tyndall had hoped to be here today, but he was not able to do so. He was disappointed he couldn't join us, but he did record a message that he wanted us to play, and we'll do that for you now.
Hello everybody. I wanted to talk to you about a journey I've been on for over 15 years now, and that's collaboration across New Zealand to try and get sustainability moving. With all the things we read about in climate change, it's incredibly important that we in business take a lead. And it's got to be a lead in collaboration that works for you and makes things better for your company as well. In the Warehouse Group, the Red Sheds, the Blue Sheds and Noel Leeming, we do a community and environment report which talks about some of the savings we're able to make in doing the right thing. So in energy conservation, we are retrofitting all our stores throughout the country, and when we replace the old light bulbs with the new ones, we're saving 30% in energy. It's just huge. We surveyed our customers a few years ago and asked them about what they thought about plastic bags. What we found was they were quite happy for us not to make them available for free. We've reduced the number of plastic bags just in the Red Sheds from 43 million back then down to only 6. If somebody now wants a bag, they have to pay for it, and that money is being distributed through local communities to the tune of $400,000 every year. I wanted to now talk to you about biodiversity. Biodiversity is incredibly important for us as businesses to get involved in. There are some huge benefits for you as businesses, as well as for the biodiversity side of New Zealand. The Tyndall Foundation sent a number of people across to Australia to look at what they were doing in Gondwana Link called Greening Australia. We brought some of their people back here, we went back again, and we have chosen the whole of Northland to be our large landscapes project. Now, in collaboration with iwi, Landcare, DOC, a lot of local landowners, people who have rivers running through their properties, we are now embarking on a 30-year project which will take us through to the SBC's Vision 2050 time about changing the way that we work with landscapes in New Zealand. And I think it's something that each of you should have a close look at because it's very good for your business. We've had a few inquiries about Pure Advantage. About 3 years ago, a number of us in New Zealand decided that we needed to take Nicholas Stern's words about climate change and do something in the business community to help. Something that would also be an advantage to our businesses. Because if we use the purity of New Zealand and turn that to our advantage, we've got export potential coming out our ears. So the areas that we've decided to work with corporates on, which will be announced later this year, again, biodiversity, waste to energy, healthy homes, biomass to energy, geothermal, and sustainable agriculture. These things, we think, if corporates pick up with them and run with them, are going to make an enormous difference to New Zealand and give us the pure advantage we need. We've had a philosophy at the Warehouse now since the beginning that people come first. And what we get told time and time again by people that have worked for us now for over 25 years is that what gets them out of bed in the mornings and makes them really believe in the company is the work we do in communities and the work we do through sustainability. That's the passion that drives them, and that's what retaining good people's all about. And I know that you want to attract and retain good people as well. If you do these sort of things, take it from me, it really works. Have a great conference.
Landscape scale conservation, such as the Reconnecting Northland project, is the wave of the future. The good news is it's here now. Congratulations to Sir Stephen, WWF New Zealand, and the New Zealand Land Care Trust for aiming so high with this inspirational project. We wish them well as a model for the future of all New Zealand. Kim, you're back on deck. You and your panel.
I thought you were going to give me a nice introduction again. Can't get enough of those nice introductions. Follow me, panel. Thank you. Let me introduce the panel for this afternoon. We have Sir Bob Harvey, Chair of Waterfront Auckland. He was a six-term mayor of Waitakere City, and the only way they got rid of him was by amalgamating Waitakere City into Auckland. He received the UN Lifetime Achievement Award for the Environment in 2007. Professor Bruce Clarkson is Dean of Science and Engineering at Waikato University and Director of the Environmental Research Institute there. He's focused on applying his research to the protection and restoration of native plants, ecosystems. He's been involved in a number of ecological restoration projects, which I hope he'll mention, and in working out how to restore Indigenous biodiversity in cities, of course, Marlene Laros has just been speaking about. Devon McLean is Director of Project Yanzoon, a privately funded campaign to enhance the ecological security of the Abel Tasman National Park. He's had a long career in the forestry industry in tandem with conservation projects. And Kevin Prime is Environmental Coordinator for Te Runanga o Ngāti Hine. He served 2 terms on the Environment Court. He's been a farmer and a forester, and his multitude of community interests include conservation and the environment. Can I invite Sir Bob Harvey to speak first, please? You can go up or you can stay there.
Well, I'll do it from here. Is that
Okay.
Yeah. Kia ora. Good afternoon. I've got 5 minutes or something to tell you a little bit.
No something, just 5.
5,
Yeah.
4, 3, 2. Here we go. I think Call Me Ishmael. It's the opening line of Moby Dick. And when I was about 15, I went out to a beach called Karikari, which was the scene of the movie The Piano. And I kind of built a little fire on the beach, I guess. And I wanted to be a writer then. I was pretty young. And I fell in love with the environment. And I've never left it there. The surf club adopted me, brought me up, taught me how to be a man and all that kind of stuff. I'm still learning to be that. But I knew that something should happen, I guess. And here on this beach, I kind of found a thing called leadership. We're in the 1950s where it wasn't that popular. And I just believed so much in the natural environment. And I went back into town and got a job, made my career in advertising. And in 1972, I talked Norman Kirk, who wanted to be the Prime Minister, into doing an environmental campaign. I did a preserving jar ad, which he hated, and I did on the top called It's Preserving Time. It was time for labour, it was time for the environment. And from that, the environmental movement, I guess, kind of kicked off. And so I did a thing for Manapuri, which was a very successful campaign. And I kind of thought there's something about the environment or conservation that might matter. Well, I stuck it out in advertising for 30 years, making people buy things they didn't want, I guess. And I sold the business, and I thought the retirement home was looming. And I thought I just might try and save the ranges from development, death of 1,000 cuts. I was 52, and I thought, well, they might give me a go. They'd booted Chad Bolt out, and he'd been a pretty good mayor, I thought. I'll try and be the mayor. And so in 1992, I was absolutely obsessed with the Rio conference and what it was saying and indicating. And I thought something smart, and I'd worked for mayors and things doing strategic stuff. And I thought if a mayor doesn't have an idea, he's dog meat. I have to have an idea. And I thought, I'm going to try with the Westies. I was a Westie. I've been out there for so long. I'm going to ask them if they would like to buy into an eco-city idea. And they elected me with about 20,000 votes majority. And I thought, God, they like this. They don't like me particularly. I think I'm a bit of a tree hugger. But they kind of like what I'm doing. Well, I had the most amazing first year. There was a water crisis and the dams ran out. And I managed to talk Westies, who will do everything if you ask them and nothing if you tell them, into saving water. And suddenly I was a bit of the boy wonder of local government. I wasn't a tree hugger anymore. I was someone that was quite smart. Well, I had a great deputy mayor, Dorothy Wilson, and away we went. We cleaned up the streams. We got rid of graffiti. Cost a huge amount of money on the ratepayers, but too late to tell them that now. And suddenly the eco-city made sense. We brought Maori, Pacific, ethnic communities in and gave them a seat at the table, unheard of in local government. Peter Sharples became the first chair, and suddenly the city started to look good. Suddenly, after a while, crime started to go down. Suddenly, we were kind of like, okay, we had cleaned up the green thing from being out there to kind of normal. And then the world started to go crazy. Every time you looked at television, you saw houses floating down rivers somewhere else, mudslides. Suddenly, I'd got it right. I'd picked the one thing that people were troubled about, concerned about. And so the environment became my life, my everything. I got re-elected, and we did more. We then converted the city, the streets, into safe city. We joined ICLE, and we brought Māori into the centre of the city, and it became our life. The partnerships with schools, with the courts, with the cops, all mattered. And business suddenly came out west. We developed a movie studio which produced 1,500 jobs every week. We redeveloped the town centres, all under the Eco-City banner. We cleaned up green, and we won awards internationally by pulling out tons and tons of shopping trolleys and everything that people had thrown into our streams for the last 80 years. Took helicopters to lift car bodies out. Westies used to dump their cars in the river. They used to take their shopping out of the thing and then throw the shopping trolley over the bridge. So there was some bad behaviour that had to be cleaned up, and we did. And we became a city to be noticed. Globally, internationally, people said, how am I going? 1 minute to go?
Oh, one.
One, okay. And I loved it. I loved the job. I did about 700 meetings a year. It ate my life, I can tell you. But I didn't mind. I wanted to be an environmental mayor that actually had something to pass on. And so that happened for 18 years. The city grew. It became very prosperous and it became very safe. We got awards out of Sweden for the safest city in New Zealand because people didn't kill themselves on Saturday by driving into trees and power poles. Something wonderful happened in that city. It was transformed from bad Bougainville, scribbled all round. Kim and I had a session. She said, you'll never clean up graffiti. I put in about $1 million, and it kind of worked. I could never work with domestic violence. I put in about $2 million every year. Huge amount of money. Some out of the Mural Fund, which no one knew about. And I slowed it down, but I couldn't stop it. All politicians and politics end in tears. I couldn't do that. But the city was merged 2.5 years ago into Auckland, and it still continues to be successful, green, and business likes what happened. The last line of Moby Dick is, I alone live to tell the tale. So here I'm sitting here telling you all before I go off to the rest home. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Professor Bruce Clarkson.
I have to stand up, Kevin.
Good.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you to Charles and Jeff for the invitation to speak to you. One could get very depressed listening to the statistics that we heard about this morning, and I guess it's my job really to tell you about a local example of how you can fix things. It's a story really about how you can empower communities, how you can mobilise communities of interest, and you can help reverse the decline of natural capital, both locally, regionally, and nationally. I thought I'd take a leaf from the Book of the Vatican. I'm going to outline a small ecological miracle. It involves a halo and a proposal for a new saint, one who never asked what his rights were on private property, but focused on his responsibilities to the next generation. So my role in this really is that I'm interested in how you restore natural ecosystems, how you reassemble them, how you bring them back from scratch. And I'm living in the heart of the Waikato biodiversity desert. A desert where only 1.6% of the original ecosystems remain in the Hamilton Basin, and in the city where only 0.1% of the vegetation is dominated by native plants and animals. So in other words, I'm in the game of helping communities bring back nature back into the city, not just for its own sake or for heritage values, but for the multiple services that they provide. And most importantly, I think, as a socio-cultural and education process, which can be used to reconnect a new generation of young, mainly urban-dwelling New Zealanders with their environment. So as I said, Hamilton Kirikiriroa is in the heart of a biodiversity desert, and so we started at almost ground zero. An early pioneer of gully restoration in Hamilton was a man by the name of Elwyn J. Seeley. He started out more than 50 years ago planting up his own backyard in native forest. The idea sat around for a long time. A thesis was published in 1976 suggesting that this restoration in an urban environment would be a good thing, but it gathered dust and no one really took much notice. In the early 2000s, momentum grew and work began on a range of public and private sites, including the Hamilton Gullies, but also the biggest gully of all, the Waikato River. About 8% of the total city area is made up of these gully environments, and at the time they were completely dominated by what some scientists today refer to as novel ecosystems. This is an overstatement for willow forest, a type we in fact do not want. So the work proceeded apace, and early on in the process, a community group by the name of Tui 2000 made the connection with the wildlife in the city and suggested that by the year 2000, the goal should be that the iconic tui should return to Hamilton City, having been absent for more than 100 years. So work continued apace, and not only confined itself to the gully, but then moved into a new natural heritage park near the Hamilton Zoo called Waiwhakariki, where this Arbor Day, just finished, we reached a 22-hectare planting target when 2.5 hectares was planted up in 25,000 plants in 2.5 hours by 1,300 people. with the critical synergy of another program called the Hamilton Halo, which focused on pest control in the peri-urban zone, focused mainly on ship rats, certainly not on cats. By the year 2009, the Tui tipping point was reached. At that point, birds once again inhabited the city, nested in the city, commonly visited the city, and the record at the university campus where I worked last year was 10 birds on a single Tyrone cherry tree. We believe in Hamilton that we are on target to, by the year 2015, to have almost 9% of the city matrix dominated by the indigenous plants and birds, which would then match the city in New Zealand with the best current statistics. I wonder how many of you know which one that is. New Plymouth, Taranaki, has the highest proportion of indigenous vegetation in the built-up matrix at 8.5% of any city in New Zealand. Not only, though, as I said, to gain the heritage value, the connection with nature, but also to gain all of those other values that ecological restoration or restoring natural capital, as we might refer to it as, can bring. This includes, of course, water and air quality, recreation in our city, focused on that gully system, more than 100 kilometres of trails in the gully environment. The carbon sequestration offered by all of that tree planting, the climate amelioration offered by all of that tree planting, to more than compensate, I hope, from the withdrawn V8 supercar event. And of course, the economic benefit of the tourist attraction. In fact, our Hamilton Gardens are the most visited venue in the city and do contribute millions of dollars to its economic wealth. Considered in a broader portfolio with the zoo, the gardens, the natural heritage park, and the gully environment, the economic benefit that that brings to Hamilton City. The ones that I'm particularly interested in, though, the health benefit, the benefit of being out there doing it on the ground, getting a sweat up, working towards a common purpose, the social cohesion provided to the community by working on projects like this, reconnecting urban dwellers who are disconnected from their environment to their nature heritage, and above all, providing a more livable and more beautiful city. As my potential saint once said, Elwyn J. Seeley, working on his gully, "I have every weed known to humankind, but in the end, the bush prevails." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. Can I invite Devon McLean to speak now?
Thank you, Kim. Good afternoon, everybody. Kiwis have had a bit of a love-hate relationship with nature for a long time. My great-great-great-grandfather came out on a ship to New Zealand in 1842, settled in Rewalker as a blacksmith and helped the farmers and the loggers denude the Waimea Plains and other parts of that area. And I think the phrase he probably most frequently remembered was bloody bush. And yet, not very long after, in 1894, by legislation, the New Zealand government created the first nature reserve in New Zealand, Little Barrier Island. And in 1886, the paramount chief of Te Whareitoa gifted the tops of the mountains to form the first New Zealand National Park and the fourth national park in the world. So we've had this love-hate relationship for some time. Today we pride ourselves in our beautiful country, and we love the accolades we get from visitors when they come here and they're just blown away by the place. We admire the skills and the dedication of our Department of Conservation staff and the great work they do, which is now in demand around the world because of all their firsts. We allow ourselves to be told that we're clean and green and 100% pure. But we harbour some deep concerns, I think, that it may not really be so. And worse, that we don't have an action plan, so it isn't getting any better. My experience over the last 25 years has been a mix of corporate environment in the forestry sector and environmental projects, in particular as a foundation trustee of Project Crimson, and most recently with Project Janzoon. And I've picked up a few pointers, I think, along the way as to how people operate in this space. The first one I would say, and the thing that I think most benefited from Project Crimson's activity, was that people want to do the right thing, but mostly they don't know how. And if you can do the simple things locally to empower them, to show them where to plant the tree, how to remove the weed, how to control the pest, you give them a strength and a courage to go out and do amazing things. And if there is a legacy for Project Crimson, it's that tens of thousands of people around New Zealand went out and did something in their own backyard. I also have that experience of the fact that individuals value nature, but corporations don't and can't. It was great to see the clip from Sir Stephen Tyndall there, and you have to believe that his personal advocacy, his personal belief in that is such a key driving force behind that operation. I don't mean in any way to demean the work that corporations do in New Zealand and around the world in terms of the environment, but I think if you lift the covers, you find in every case a passionate or a number of passionate people who are driving that. And I've certainly experienced that with conservation funding for various projects that we've worked on, that if you lose the passionate leader, you can very quickly be at risk in terms of your funding, and the organisation can be in risk in terms of the credibility that it's created. And all of these projects we're working on are long-term projects. They're not things that can be turned off on a quarterly result or a three-year political campaign. They need to be long-lived to have real effect. Employees love their company to be involved in these kinds of projects. Stephen made the same point in the video, and you often see that. It's got to be one of the main drivers for corporations getting involved in environmental projects. On the flip side, I think business skills make a difference when it comes to environmental projects. But they have to be able to nurture the individual passions of the people who are involved in these projects. So we can provide some strategy, we can talk about goals and tighten them up. We can have action-grounded projects that are based on good science. We can measure what we're achieving and not achieving along the way, and we can set up a learning environment that gradually evolves to do a better job. Out in our communities, we've got a whole bunch of people who are not waiting for the world to change, as was the comment in Marlene's presentation. We're blessed with a great cohort of people out there. They place their own value on nature, and they put their time and their own resources into it. They're unsung, but they're delighted when they receive some recognition or some encouragement, and they like you to appreciate the journey that they've been on. And their greatest fear in the end is that their efforts have been in some way in vain, because when their enthusiasm dies, they're not sure it's going to be picked up. And yet every day they still go out there and they check the stoat traps, pull the weeds, plant some trees, count the birds, kill the pests. I was very interested in the conversations in the first debate this morning, or discussion this morning, and wondering about where does our unique natural environment fit as a country's competitive edge? Does it really confer on us a competitive edge? If everybody loves our place so much, how come we can't turn that into something quite specific and unique? It can inspire us as a nation. It already does. It's probably the thing that most holds us together, perhaps after the All Blacks. It's a great way to attract the skills and attitudes that we need in this country. How do we encourage the right people to come here? My great-great-grandfather was part of a New Zealand company campaign to bring settlers to New Zealand. Maybe we need a new New Zealand company to bring the kinds of skills, attitudes, and approach out here that will allow us to transition from resource-hungry, resource-mining businesses that are so critical to our economy now, and in a 20 to 50-year time frame transform what New Zealand is all about. It can generate sustainable economic returns, and also right now it can hone the skills and systems the things that we develop here in New Zealand for achieving better environmental and ecological outcomes can be honed and exported to the world, as they are now. We are the world's best clear up of rodents on islands, and there are a lot of Kiwis involved in that process. Failing to value nature places us at risk of the very essence of who we are, and I think it's time that we get on with it. Thank you.
That was an abrupt ending. Thank you very much. Kevin, kia ora.
E ngā rauranga tira mā tēnā rā koutou katoa. I too took heart from Marlene's quote, "Don't wait for the world to change, but be part of changing the world." So Stephen alluded to reconnecting Northland. It's a new paradigm in conservation management, taking a larger and longer term view of the whole landscape that contribute to ecosystem functioning rather than focusing on a single species or isolated protected areas. This kaupapa recognises human uses of the landscape and makes space for nature whilst appreciating the need for the landscape to provide sustainable livelihoods for people. Concepts such as ecological corridors, buffer zones, riparian strips will be used to reconnect remaining areas of intact habitat. We want to achieve this by being innovative and not business as usual. We intend to involve farmers, foresters, landowners, district and regional councils, iwi, NGOs, government departments and community groups. Governance to date has been via steering group at national level, but will involve local people later. While the main focus will be in Northland, the steering committee decided to use the Taitokerauiwi boundaries, which includes all the land north of the Tamaki estuary. Northland was selected for its large landscape initiative because it is a large and coherent landscape with a good quantity of and pattern of indigenous vegetation remaining. It has many endemic, rare and threatened species and ecosystems. It has a good mix of land types and land uses compatible with restoration and sustainable land use. There is potential for climate change mitigation, a strong unified restoration vision, restoration to generate direct economic and social benefits and to attract funding. There is a strong iwi and community relationships and support. The project will be funded by the Tyndall Foundation. This wasn't a jack-up between me and Sir Stephen. The ASB Community Trust and the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. Many thanks for their support. Up and running is the Kiwi Coast Project. Some of the goals are to reconnect fragmented habitats and isolated populations of species, reconnect people to nature, promoting the strength and stewardship and kaitiakitanga, reconnect communities to one another through working towards a shared vision, support the recovery of local Kiwi populations, celebrate the presence of Northland brown Kiwi as a taonga, reduce pests that threaten Kiwi, facilitate safe movement of Kiwi and other native species, encourage ecological health restoration and integrity of Kiwi habitats, including native forests, scrublands, streams, dunelands and wetlands, and to encourage people to engage in kaitiakitanga or stewardship to protect and nurture Northland's biodiversity for future generations. In the wings, we planned a kaipara project which covers New Zealand's largest estuarine ecosystem of 640,000 hectares, extending across the Northland and Auckland regions. Their vision is a healthy and the vision for that, is a healthy and productive kaipara harbour. We also plan a warawara project, almost 7,000 hectares of bush-clad mountains in the North Hokianga. The vision for that is that the biodiversity and mātauranga of warawara forest and surrounds is strengthened and maintained through an enhanced level of kaitiakitanga by Te Rarawa communities with support from other agencies, organisations and groups. The steering committee hoped to identify every conservation effort being undertaken in Taitokerau to find the gaps and areas or groups that need more support for better biodiversity gains. This is only achievable with our wide local community support, and we're really grateful for the support from the Tyndall Foundation, who were really the ones that dreamt this up. Kia ora.
Thank you. I feel very optimistic, thanks to you guys saying what can be done at the local level. Can I just ask you, Bob, something wonderful happened, you say, in Waitakere after the merger 2.5 years ago. Do you think that sense of itself as an eco-city will continue in Waitakere?
I'm really concerned about the Waitakere Ranges. We worked for 40 years to ensure that the foothills would be free of rampant development, and we succeeded by 1 vote. And we got it, and we're going to celebrate on Friday 5 years since we got that bill through Parliament, and I'm going along to rev them up because I think it's now under threat.
All right.
I think that, hey, okay, celebrate from 6 to 7, and then from 8 to 9, let's get the war machine, not pacifist, but the war machine out, because I think it is under threat.
Because there's
already.
a tension, isn't there, between,
Yep.
you know, small and local is good, but doing good on a bigger scale is
Yep.
also better if you can do it, and whether a bigger scale is compatible with what you
So
spoke
I think
about.
the luck that happened was that Penny Hulse was a fantastic deputy, and she and I worked to get that through. She ran off, of course, and stood for Auckland. And to be honest, I actually thought of running off and starting being the mayor of Auckland too, to keep the thing going. But I liked Len very much, and I thought the old Emperor Tatius thing, he'd have made a fabulous mayor if he hadn't been one, was my kind of, didn't want that on my tombstone. And so I thought Len will do it, and Len has, and Penny, as his deputy, has kept that environmental and eco thing going. But hey, I reckon it's a bit of a struggle. Already we're seeing people saying all that Agenda 21 bullshit that Mayor Harvey, thank God he's gone, is over. And now let's have some freedom and let's get those things going. So I think the battle, if you like, never ends.
It's an interesting point, isn't it, Bruce? What was your experience in Hamilton? Because Hamilton's a relatively compact city, and you were able to do things with the community there. Is the scale important?
Yeah, the scale is. I mean, it's not just about what you do within the city, it's what you do in the peri-urban zone and the wider region. And there are many vehicles for making that coordination and integration occur, I think. And we need to remember that in this process, there are a number of organisations that have been established, like biodiversity forums, for example, where different players come together and work in a more coordinated and integrated way. But the same pressures that Bob's talking about are occurring in many cities in New Zealand. So Hamilton is under an interesting
It's a bit
economic...
of a pushback, isn't it?
Yeah, a
So-
bit of a pushback,
Yeah.
and also some shortage of cash due to a failed V8 supercar project. And but you know, the point about all of this is that local initiatives don't just disappear because of what happens in central government, and they certainly don't stop because of what happens in meetings in Wellington either, I have to say. So, you know, my view on all of this is the local people, they're the ones, you know, if they're empowered, if a community of interest gets together, there's actually nothing that can stop them.
But not necessarily all stakeholders have common interests, do they? There are different forms of interest. How do you negotiate between those? This is the point that Marlene Laros was making earlier.
Yeah, they have you know, different viewpoints often, but the question is how do you build the common purpose? And when you have a project like the one that I described, the Waiwhakariki Natural Heritage Park, it's amazing how the different parties have come together. That was prime real estate, could have been subdivided by Hamilton City Council, handed over to the community to do a really innovative project.
Devon, people want to do the right thing, but they don't necessarily know how. Tell me how you tell them how to do good.
I think in the early stages of Project Crimson, that was all about providing sources of supply. We were all about Pahutakawa at that stage. We were concerned about
Which makes it
Pahutakawa
easy,
coast.
doesn't it? If you've got, here's something,
Yeah.
the only thing.
And so the simple thing was have a good stock of eco-source trees for locations, call for proposals from local communities, provide the trees, provide the know-how, get out there with them and work with them. And that was a lot of what it was about to begin with.
But then, did you have a long-term plan? Did you think, well, once we get Project Crimson up and running, then people are going to start being concerned about, indigenous species of fauna?
I don't think we were clever enough to have the long-term plan,
But
but I
has
think
it
that's
worked out
kind of
like
happened
that?
that way. It certainly has extended to beyond the Pahutakawa and then the Rata to the ecosystems that those trees are present in.
Right.
And I think it continues to flow out.
Because once you get somebody caring about this bit of Pahutakawa, then it expands out from that, presumably.
And realising they can make a difference, and it was fun. They really got a buzz out of it.
Why?
Why did they get a buzz?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's something in the Kiwi psyche that we care about these places. Anybody who lives close to any of these properties in decline can see the damage that's being done, and the chance to turn it around is just something we'd like to do.
Kevin, how Northland is sparsely populated, right?
It's true.
Has that been a disadvantage or an advantage? I mean, you need people to do stuff, or do you need people not to do stuff? What's the more important thing?
I think that was the advantage, that it is quite disparate communities, because it was looked at on a national basis, and it took about, this is 6 years since Stephen Tyndall first floated the idea and brought a few people together, and then it narrowed down to a small steering committee. And after a whole number of consultants, they decided Northland is the best place for a lot more reasons that I was able to give just now. But
Feel free to expand.
Well, it'll take too long to expand, I think, so
All right.
it's far better to limit to what I've already said. But it is an advantage, and within each community, every community has what they see as important to themselves. So in some areas it's the fresh water, some areas it's getting cars out of the stream, others it's the kiwi, others it's the pigeon, and others it's the seafood. So every community has what's important to them, and that's why even this kaupapa has encouraged a lot of the iwi participation as well.
Some, not me, of course, may be sceptical about Stephen Tyndall's corporate involvement. He runs a very successful business, which is trying to sell a lot of stuff to a lot of people at the same time. He's got this philanthropic side to him. Are you sure that he is not just using you in a good way to buff his image to sell more stuff? Or does that not matter?
Well, it doesn't matter to me. I mean, if someone puts up the dollars to do something and we do it, I mean...
Doesn't matter where the dollars come from?
Yeah, well, it does to me, but you don't look a gift horse in the mouth, really.
No. And has he been hands-on?
Well, he's been... a lot of this initial work was actually pulling a whole lot of people together to get ideas together. And then, after it's taken 6 years to where we are now, and it was only this month, I think, or last month, that we had the first meeting pertaining to Northland itself, after Northland was identified as the most suitable in the country.
And of course, one of the benefits of what you've all been talking about is making a community aware of itself as a community. Some people don't necessarily have anything in common when they're living in proximity to each other, but this gives them something in common.
I could never believe I could drag 5,000 people out in Waitakere over 10 years to plant trees in the Twin Streams project. Believe me, of little faith I had, that was such a big project from all the way from the Waitakere Ranges to the sea. I thought this is going to take China to do this, and 100 years. It took 10 years of people every week pulling out weeds and planting trees. We won all those awards on this remarkable thing. They're still doing it. We had people on PD, we had nuns, we had gang members, we had school kids. They're still there. I saw at Piha about 100 people at Piha at the weekend. They'd been all weekend planting flax on the hillside. I thought, wow, it isn't lost. I did a thing called Trees for Babies, which I just want to rave about in 1 second. A woman came to me and said, hey, why don't we take all some trees to all our local parks once a year, and all the local people can bring the kids that have been born in that area around, and we'll give them a tree. And we said, what a great idea. We've planted about 15,000 trees in Trees for Babies.
Yeah.
It just works. And those trees now are pretty big trees, and so are the kids. And it's just gone everywhere. I sold it into
You want to
Hawaii.
incentivise babies that way, though, would you?
I'd love to. Well,
Because
of
remember the
course.
population explosion. The
I've got
careful
6
balance.
of my own.
Right.
Yeah, but I know.
Ah.
But it's a nice idea, and ideas catch fire. And I think you have to do that. I miss that. I don't miss the job being mayor, but boy, I sure do miss those projects. Because I think it's about leadership, by the way. I think it is about pure leadership, and the community needs leadership that they like, with a bit of fun too. I don't know if these conferences have too much fun, but somehow I think they might after hours. But hey, you've got to do these things with fun, and you've got to do it with a light touch, or it will have a backlash, and they'll go, what a boring bit of, let's not
But
do
you
this.
do need the right, I mean, this is what you were saying, Devon, you need individuals to make the change, to make the difference. Leaders.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. And, I think in the corporate environment or any business environment, we need to be looking for young people who show the aptitude to do those kinds of things and encouraging them, because in the traditional corporate environment, you don't get too many points for being focused on things other than the bottom
Well,
line.
no, but if
performance.
Pavan Sukhdev has his way, then we're going to have social corporations and
Yep.
everything's going to be different.
That'll be extraordinarily good when it happens.
You look a bit sceptical.
I'd love to think it will go that way, and I think we could be doing more to promote that. And a lot of it's about, how do you rise through the ranks in an organisation to a position of leadership, and what are the criteria that are used to decide who goes forward and who doesn't.
Yeah.
And you could have somebody at the top who believes in this stuff, who's willing to promote folk who've got an interest in a broader corporate social
They
responsibility.
need mentors.
Absolutely.
I think you have to find mentors for leadership, and then you have to be willing to pass it on. I think that's one of the problems I'm finding, is that everybody's old, including myself.
Everybody's old.
Bloody old. And, I'm 72, and I'm thinking, oh, well, where's my, where's the young men and women? Everybody who was planting at Piha looked like they were 72.
Is that
too.
interesting? Is that because they've got more time on their hands?
Yeah, and they don't want to do these kind of things. And leadership is tough in this country, and it's punishing and hard. I was, 2 weeks ago, I was in Taksim Square with a Turkish friend, jumping up and down, protesting. God knows why I was doing that. But I thought, gee,
You
I
like
love protest.
Zelig, aren't
I
you?
love protest. I
Yes.
think, where are those protest days? I can't believe we don't have that kind of, they weren't that angry. And I was a bit scared, to be honest. But I thought, hey, I love this. I want to go back and get into a bloody protest again.
Well-
Maybe I'll do that next week when I wind them up in the Waitakere.
Why not? Why not? It would be nice to think that if enough communities did what the communities you've been describing this afternoon are doing, they'll all join hands and the world will be a better place. But that comes back to my question about scale, really, to Bruce. Is it scalable up, what you've been doing? Is it scalable up?
Yeah, well, it's a question of how you provide the sorts of supports and incentive at the different scales. So, the local initiatives, there are ways you can get them to join hands, and I think the same applies to regional to region, and making it a national approach. There's no reason why not. It is really about...
But the reason why not is that, I don't know, there's anthropological evidence to show that a certain number of people can form a community, and as soon as it gets bigger than that, then it becomes, another community with a different set of interests and a different lot of stakeholders. So you've got an optimum group of people. As soon as it gets too scaled up, you lose the focus.
Well, I don't think you necessarily do, because they have common purpose, so often they're trying to achieve similar things in different parts of the country. The question is, how do they share information about best practice? How do they learn from something that somebody learnt in another part of the country? How do they find the best way of doing things? There's only one way to do that, and that is you've got to actually communicate at a range of levels, not just locally, but regionally and nationally. And there are ways that people can assist with this process. Department of Conservation do this, regional and district councils do this. They provide forums, they provide incentive, And really, it's just a matter of how you put the equation together. All of the bits are there.
Such a good point.
I'm interested to know about
Yeah, that's
what you're doing in Abel Tasman National Park Project Jansun, not Janssen as I called it. It's Jansun, is it?
Janssen, I think, if
Janssen?
you're Dutch, yes.
Its dock, of course, is charged with running that place. So why is a private outfit stepping in, and is this a good thing?
I think it's a wonderful thing. DOC is continuing to run the park, and as you know, the Abel Tasman has a huge number of visitors, something like 160,000 people walk the track each year. But the peculiarity of the Abel Tasman National Park is that if the land was any good, it would be in dairy farms, not a national park. Lots of people tried to farm it for more than 100 years and failed, and fortunately it was picked up in 1942 and turned into a national park. But the consequence of that is that a huge amount of the park, particularly the part that you see when you walk the track, is heavily modified. It's been farmed, it's returning from pasture, or it's been logged. So that's really the golden opportunity. But the other piece of that, of course, is that when DOC looks at their priorities in terms of protecting the biodiversity of New Zealand, the Abel Tasman National Park doesn't rank particularly highly. And yet here's a perfect size, 22,000 hectares.
It doesn't rank particularly highly because it's impure, as it
Because
were.
it's impure,
Right.
yeah. But that's because of what is lost. And so what we're setting about doing is returning what is lost from that. And we have the wonderful opportunity to use that advocacy chance with 160,000 visitors a year to tell them about what's happening in New Zealand. There are, there are interesting challenges in the process. We have a lot of commercial operators in the park who operate kayaking and water taxis and so on, and they're absolutely, we're delighted that we're doing this, but they're just telling us to make sure we don't tell anybody there's anything wrong with the park.
Yes. Yes, the park's perfect, but we're working on it.
That's it, yeah.
So who have you got doing what?
So I have DOC on contract, doing some big scale projects at the moment. Last year, 5,000.
So you're paying DOC to do work on Abel Tasman National Park?
I am, because they're the best people for this particular task to do it. They've got the best skills. So last year they did 5,000 hectares of new stoat lines. This year they will have 10,000 more hectares done before Christmas. But other parties are doing particular things. Independent contractors are providing weed surveys, which are now completed for the park. Others are involved in restoration projects in particular areas of particular ecosystem.
I mean, all this opens up the big question of how much should be the government responsibility and how much should be privately farmed out. You are effectively employing DOC to do something that we, as taxpayers, thought we were enabling DOC to do.
Well, we have massive expectations of DOC over 8 million hectares of New Zealand, which they simply can't fulfil.
So you're letting the government off the hook with that. Is that all right?
I don't know that that's all right, but arguing about it for the next 50 years and doing nothing isn't all right.
All right. And you're letting the government off the hook by allowing Stephen Tyndall to do good works and burnish his own reputation at the same time.
Well, in fairness, I don't think the government has the resources. I mean, I've sat on both. I mean, when you're a farmer, you're practical and you know you can't do certain things without the resources. And I could understand why the government cuts funding to different organisations, because they're short of money and they want to spend it elsewhere.
They've got the resources to put a casino conference centre in Auckland, which might be used better if we got rid of pests in New Zealand. Devon, why don't you pick up on that? Do you think, because Project Crimson is up and away, do you think we could get New Zealand pest-free? That's Paul Callahan's idea. I love that idea.
Most certainly. I think
that?
that's something I tried to float it in about 1990. I think I talked about a pest-free Northland, and I took that to the Conservation Board, and they said, oh, that's a 50-year plan. I thought, well, I didn't think so, but I mean, it's a matter of how keen people are to put their own resources
We're trying
into
to bring Kiwis back into the Waitakere Ranges. We think that's possible. We've got to get dogs out of the
How are you going to
apartment.
keep them out?
The dogs?
Yes.
I think it's going to be easy enough.
It's
I-
the
no,
cats.
it's gonna be hard.
It's the cats. You have to worry about them.
No, the cats don't go in the bush that far.
Don't they?
No, but
I
dogs
thought they
do.
had huge... Anyway, that's
No,
beside
no,
the
no,
point.
but-
We have questions. Questions? If you have a... Yes, approach the microphones. It should be any minute now. Testing, testing. Is that mic on, please? You could shout for a while. Yeah, I might go to you on that, Devon, as you're an observer of the tourism, for example, at Abel Tasman. I mean, do you think that that would be such a terrible thing to make people coming into the country pay a smidgen more?
I don't think it would be a terrible thing at all. In fact, in the Abel Tasman, the concession operators provide a small amount, certainly not $25 per person, but a small amount for every visitor day back to another trust, the Birdsong Trust, which does some excellent work in the park. So there are some precedents for that sort of thing. I think the challenge has always been, what's the mechanism to make it work? Do you charge everybody coming through the international airport? And then what do you do about the Kiwis coming home for Christmas? And
Charge them too.
yeah, maybe.
Charge-
Charge them double.
charge
yeah, they've been
everybody.
away.
Government's very
Yeah.
reluctant to do that. We tried to do something like that, and that became a resounding no.
Why?
They're just reluctant to tax the door. Well,
Because it feels like we're gouging.
when you lived in the North Shore, when they put the harbour in, you had to pay 20 cents to go home, type of thing, and people got sick of that. I think I love the idea. I think $10 would be terrific.
But the other thing,
I think we
tourists come to
probably
New
do.
Zealand and think we're incredibly expensive as it is.
Well, that's what they do on the in the wharf. Everybody that goes down that gangplank pays, I think, about $7 to the Auckland Harbour Board. So they clip the ticket there. I think it's a great idea. I think we should say from this conference we'd like to see it done.
Yeah, but you'd have to give up charging them in Auckland as well. I mean, we can't do it everywhere.
The Auckland Airport charges about $50 a day, an hour to just park there, for God's sake.
No. That's wrong, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bruce, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to echo some of the other comments. I mean, the point about this, when we talk about the Department of Conservation lands, the point is they're not Department of Conservation lands, they're everybody's lands. And the problem that they face, the degradation and decline, is not just their responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility. And basically, I think all of us are in the hunt to do everything we can to help them do a job better. I mean, that's just the way it is. The scale of the problem with New Zealand biodiversity is such that unless way more people are prepared to contribute, whether it be directly or indirectly, or whether it be in voluntary activity, whatever it might be, the scale of the problem is such that, you know, the 330 million approximately the Department of Conservation has to manage 1/3 of New Zealand is never going to do it. So we've all got to get in behind them and help them do the job.
Another question.
Is this working?
Yes, it is.
I'd like to ask everyone here to put their hand up if they've actually been involved in a conservation project. How many here? I think we have.
Good question.
We have evidence that the bulk of New Zealanders are concerned, and we do something about it.
No. You've got evidence that a lot of people who are concerned are here.
Who can afford
They're going to do
This
something
means we're
about
talking
it.
to ourselves, right?
Yes.
Well, I would just like to say that I personally have been involved, know of at least 4 projects in terms of replanting various parts of New Zealand, and I would suspect that sort of unofficial work goes on all the time, and it is integral to the Kiwi nature, and I'm not as pessimistic perhaps as some of the panel here before us today.
Thank you.
Well said.
Any more advances on the microphone? Any questions for any of the panel? I mean, the point is, yes.
Yeah, hi, Kim. You need to understand that every kid needs a treat a hug. That's Bob's version. I'm Gary Dalton from Whangai Trust. We've been listening a lot to how the biggest problem to council and top-down decisions, the biggest obstacle is community. In developing a community organisation, the biggest obstacle becomes local government, Crown, and the government. Why is that, do you know? You know, everyone has the opposite problem. Do you understand the question?
No.
You don't? If top-down decisions, right, have an obstacle of convincing local communities of the value and the good and the need to do it, okay? If you're developing an idea from the community or bottom up, the hardest people to convince is local government, regional government and the Crown.
Why do you think that is? Because it's a...
Well, I'm asking you, why is that? Because everyone has, we have the same problem in reverse.
All right. Who has experienced this? That it's hard to get off the ground because the weight of local government or central government is in some way a chilling?
I don't believe that at all.
Okay.
No, I just don't. I think that if a good council will listen to their community, feel the essence of the community, and do it, or they'll get fired. The 3 years comes around very quickly. And so I think my experience is that good mayors and good councils, and there are a hell of a lot of them, are really in tune with their community. I'm not talking from personal experience. They soon tell you if it's not. I mean, Pennyholz has been punished terribly with this unity plan, but it's going to happen. I should be the last person to applaud a super city, but I actually think it's actually worked. It's actually worked in Auckland in some ways, and it's working. It's painful and it's not as easy as that. But I don't agree with that speaker. I think that there is a huge amount of good things environmentally that the community is saying, hey, let's do it.
I'd be interested, I don't know whether you want to go back to them. Oh, sorry.
There's
Just
a waiver
hold
up
fire.
there.
If you can tell us I think you said you were with a conservation trust of some kind. So if you can be more specific about the problems you had, but not yet, because she got there first.
I don't know that this... Oh, yes, it does. Good. I was actually wanting to say something in support of the gentleman who spoke just before. My experience in community-based activities, and I have been involved in a number of them over more years than I'd like to remember probably, but unless you meet the funding criteria of your local government or central government, you do get squashed at the grassroots. You don't get an opportunity to form together as a community group and progress ideas
What do you mean
as you might want to.
What do you mean meet the funding criteria?
Sometimes in central government and local government they're prepared to support initiatives, but if you come to them with a new initiative, it usually doesn't meet funding criteria, things that they're prepared to spend money on. So you just get cut off at the beginning.
How much money is it necessary to have before you get a community initiative off the ground? I mean, I'm not being rude here, but the whole point about community initiatives presumably is to do it for yourselves, as opposed to waiting for somebody to put money in your hand. With all due respect.
No, absolutely, and I'm just trying to think of a concrete example for you.
I'd like
that
one
would be
too.
useful. The only thing that comes, so this is through my personal experience, not my work at all. In our local community, we had an issue with a building development down the road. As a community, I think 70 of us here in Wellington got together in our local community area to challenge the decision. Cost us $180,000. There was no money forthcoming from either central or local government, and a family in our neighbourhood mortgaged their home to the tune of 180 grand to fund the initiative. I mean, that's a pretty extreme sort of example, but and not necessarily one that came off the top. There are others that I can think of because I've worked in the community for a number of years, but I agree with him.
I understand.
I understand that one too, legal challenges. I mean, huge expensive, and I wasn't talking about that. I was thinking
but
about...
that's really not what we're talking about,
No,
is it?
it's not what we're talking about.
Did you want to go back to the microphone, sir, and be more specific about if it goes to how community effort is undermined?
To give an example, we run a native plant nursery that employs at-risk people in the community, looking at developing our social, environmental, economical risks and community risks. Also, we plant the trees out and we get government contracts if we can. to carry that work on, and we earn 60% of our own income to support the trust work. We had a situation where we had extra trees, so our clients, we said, come and get them for free. So one of our local governments, and I won't mention it, turned up, took 500 trees and gave the contract to plant those trees in our local stream to someone else.
No.
The rats.
Son?
The rats. They shouldn't have
Well,
done that.
I think in the sense,
Father,
we're talking
there's
about
election here. Get rid of them.
dysfunctional collaboration, if you like.
I'll do your campaign.
I don't want to be mayor.
No, I see that point. It's it's a
Yeah.
question of kind of streamlining
Betrayal.
or all being on the same page somehow or other, yes.
My name is Prudence Stone and I am the Executive Director of the Smoke Free Coalition. I just want to pick up on a question you asked one of your panel, Kim, about...
They wouldn't take money from a tobacco company, I'm sure they wouldn't.
Well, that was the question that I was going to pick up on.
Oh, how did I know?
Yeah, because in New Zealand, here in Wellington, right here in Petone, we have a tobacco company who is very interested in building its corporate social responsibility program in its local community to basically buy community buy-in to their expanding production for the Australasian and Pacific markets by, making a big deal about the fact that they're
Yep, no, I get that point. So the question goes to trade-offs. Bruce, trade-offs.
No. I want to put it to the man who answered your question, because I do think if you are going to be taking chunks of change from philanthropists who might have a picture of themselves in an attic somewhere, have a Dorian Gray complex in their business.
Darling, I get the point. I'm about to ask the question.
Okay, go
Thank
for it.
you. Would you take money from a tobacco company?
For what project?
For any... Whoa! Okay, question answered. Would you take money from a tobacco company? He's open to deals.
But that's not my question.
All right, what is it?
My question is, do you ask your funders about their corporates, whether their corporate social responsibility program is a justification? I mean, you can't just take that money without having a rigorous accountability back to that funder.
All right, certainly a more subtle question than the one I was asking. Thank you.
Okay, if I was on a health committee and the money from a tobacco company was to assist people who are addicted to smoking, then I would certainly take it. There's a big difference between...
I think the question wasn't broad that, though. The question was, do you take money from a corporation that you are not confident behaves in a socially responsible way?
Again, it still depends on what the project is for and where it was being spent.
I mean, another dimension of that question, if you'll excuse me for elaborating possibly wrongly, is that in order to make the corporations more honest and more efficient, then you have to ask those questions. You have to say, what are you doing? We're not dealing with you unless you do that. What do you think?
I think absolutely you do. And I guess I've specific experience of that with Project Crimson when we transferred from 16 years of cardhold Harvey support and went looking for a new funder, and took 2 years to find somebody, not because there was nobody out there, but because we had to find somebody that would be compatible
Who did you
with the
turn down?
objectives. I won't give you the list. But the really interesting thing about that experience was that we ended up with a party who I believe the chief executive and key players in that organisation really believed that it was a great match. It would work really well. And within 18 months, those people had gone, and the new team didn't have that commitment. And that's one of the real challenges for these kinds of projects. We're talking about projects that last 5, 10, 15, 30 years.
Yeah.
And you have no idea who you're going to be dealing with after 18 months, let alone 10 years down the track.
What do you think, Bob? Are people doing enough to make corporations be who they say
Be
they
honest.
are.
I mean, in life-saving, BP have been with us for 40 years, and I think sometimes when they have a big oil spill, we're a pretty clean face, you know, of life-saving. We've looked at that, like, God, we're saving lives with their money, and look at Mexico, look at the oil spill. But I'm former chair of Smoke Free New Zealand.
No, but hang on, don't scoot over BP.
Oh,
Did
okay.
you ever say to BP,
Yeah, we did.
we're not being your advertising campaign unless you take
Be
the
responsible.
whole environmental
Yeah. You have to
shtick.
call, Kim, that's a bloody good question. You have to call
But you
them out.
didn't.
No, we didn't.
All right.
We didn't. But smoking and cigarette companies are just a no-no. You cannot go near them, and you shouldn't even talk to them, for God's sake. You shouldn't even
right.
answer them. They are gone
Very well.
and finished.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
That's good.
I'm a little over.
Good. Arms dealers, they're okay, but tobacco companies, no. Bruce, any views on this? Do you deal with the devil if the deal's a good one?
Well, the most important part about dealing with the devil is you actually have to have a discussion. And this is the point that the others are making, I think. So if you just put the barrier up and say, we're not even going to talk to you, you can't even explore the opportunities. You can criticise greenwash, you can use the term greenwash or whatever you like, but at some point, the dialogue has to occur. And all I'm saying is, yes, there will be people you won't deal with in the end, but you must start the discussion somewhere.
Right.
And in some cases, you may be prepared to allow a little bit of greenwash, knowing that you've finally got them hooked and they're on the journey towards where you want them to be. So you've got to stay in the discussion.
Because you see, I mean, everybody's been saying it. Nick Smith said it this morning, that we have to stop seeing the economy and the environment in the sort of polarised debate. But in order for it not to be polarised, there has to be a meeting of the two, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
It has to be a
Sorry, I
dialogue.
know there was somebody else up there with one last question, and then they probably went away after I was rude to the previous. Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. And time's up. If we've got time for one more quick one, if there's no one more quick one, I'm going to wrap it up and invite you, thank you very much, to thank the panel this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Kim. Thank you, panelists. We have certainly thought both globally and locally today. Our plenary sessions are complete for today, but there is more to come. I need to quickly mention several housekeeping matters before we head to afternoon tea and the remaining events for the day. First of all, Workshop 1 will convene here in this room exactly promptly at 3:30. For those of you attending, please be back here by that time. Workshop 2 will convene on level 7 of the Copthorne Oriental Bay Hotel. For those of you attending that workshop, please proceed directly there. Afternoon tea awaits you there. For people participating in the visit to Zealandia, please meet at the entrance to the theater at 3:30. A shuttle will be waiting for you, and you will be returned to your hotel by 7:30 tonight. Tomorrow's visit to Zealandia, in case anyone's missed the message, is not going to proceed because the weather forecast, amazingly, is inclement. Pick a Path dinner. For those of you who have chosen a venue for dinner tonight, your booking is under the name Valuing Nature. Please you can go directly to the venue at 7 p.m. If you've not registered, there are still spaces at all of them. People are welcome just to go there. For everyone else, see you tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. promptly for another start and another day. Thank you very much.